In the portion of Acharei, we speak about the first scapegoat of the Torah. The Torah tells us that on the day of Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, Aaron the high priest, would take a goat. He would place his two hands upon it, and he would recite the vidui on behalf of the Jewish people. He would articulate the sins of the Jewish people and ask God to forgive the Jews from their sins. And then they would take this goat and they would throw it over a cliff. And by doing so, we say that all the sins of the Jewish people went over the cliff together with the goat. This is the concept of the scapegoat, the Soyer L'Azazel. We find something interesting over here in the Torah, and that is a kri and a ksiv. A kri means the way we actually pronounce the word, we read the word, and the ksiv is the way the word is actually written in the Torah. So here we find the Torah says, "V'samach Aaron es yadai al rosh hasahir," that Aaron should take his hands and place it on the head of the goat, and then he would articulate the sins of the Jewish people. The word yadai, his hand, is the way the Torah writes it. That is the ksiv. The way we read it is yadav, which means his hands in the plural. For actually, Aaron put both hands on top of the sa'ir, on top of the goat, not only yadai, his one hand. So why then does the Torah say yadai, his hand, in the singular, and then we read it yadav in the plural? Furthermore, the Talmud derives a principle from this passage and says, anytime we talk about the concept of samicha, of placing the hands on the animal, and the Torah uses the word yadai, his hand, you should know, in essence, it's really plural yadav, his hands. And from this pasuk, from this passage, we derive this law for the whole Torah. So the question is, why from this pasuk, this passage in particular, do we derive this law for the entire Torah? What's so special about this pasuk? What is the concept of samicha? What is the concept of placing the hands upon the animal? So Chassidus tells us something very interesting. Chassidus says the idea of placing the hands is the concept of transmission and transformation. In other words, each individual possesses an animal soul and a godly soul. The animal soul desires eating and sleeping and money and power, etc., etc. The godly soul desires prayer and Torah study and charity and good deeds. The purpose of samicha, the purpose of placing the hands on the animal, is that the hands have 10 fingers. The 10 fingers allude to the 10 attributes of the godly soul. 3 intellectual attributes, and then 7 emotional attributes. And these 10 attributes together of the godly soul are now transmitted into the animal to transform the animal and make the animal more godly, so that the animal within inside of us, when it eats, should eat for the sake of God. When it sleeps, it should sleep for the sake of God. When it exercises, it should exercise for the sake of God. To be strong, to be able to serve God with joy, and to be able to help other people. So this is the basic concept of samicha, of placing the hands on the animal. That we transform our animal and elevate our physical deeds to make it more spiritual. Interestingly, the word yadai, which means his hand, if you add up the word yadai, yud, dalid, vav, yud is the gematria of 10, dalid is the gematria of 4, vav is the gematria of 6. It equals 20. So within the word Yadai, you have 20. 10 attributes of the godly soul and 10 attributes of the animal soul. And now they become one, because the animal becomes transformed and helps the godly soul. So this is the concept of semicha in general. So why then, if the idea of semicha is to transform the 10 attributes of the animal soul and to elevate it and make it more godly, so it should say the word yadav in the plural, because I need my 10 fingers. Why then does the Torah only use the word yadai in the singular? And the answer is that when the Torah uses the word yadai in the singular, it is alluding to the right hand, his right hand. In other words, when a person bestows kindness on another person, he must do it with his right hand. Sometimes you want to do a person a favor, but the person who we're doing the favor thinks we're hurting them. And we are applying pain onto that individual. We think we're helping them. The individual thinks we're paining them. So that says the Torah, when you try to help another person, you should do it with your right hand. That's the way you should transform the person. Not through what we call musar, by constantly degrading the other person, but rather through semicha, to lift them up, through inspiring the other person. And that is why we derive this law specifically from this passage, because in this passage we are talking about Acharei and Aaron the high priest. And we know that in Ethics of Our Fathers it says, Hevei mitalmidav shel Aaron, one shall be like the disciples of Aaron. What was unique about Aaron? Oyev shalom v'roidev shalom. He loved peace and pursued peace. Oyev es habriyos, he loved even simple people. Umekarvel na Torah, he brought them close to the Torah. He elevated them to the Torah. He did not bring the Torah down to them, but rather he lifted them up. And therefore, to imply this idea and to intimate the concept that when you do a person a favor, it should always be done with the right arm and the right hand, Torah says yadoi, it should be his hand, the right hand, even though in reality we are dealing with both hands. Another interesting insight. The Torah says here that you should do smicha upon the animal. Now the concept of smicha, the literal translation of smicha, comes from the word somech noflim, which means to lift up those that have fallen. So many of us think that when we give charity to a poor person with our right hand, so we're helping the person. Why does God want more from us? We did whatever we could. We participated. And we gave charity. Says the Torah, no. Even though you're giving only yadoi, your right hand, to give charity, but really you have to give of all 10 fingers. You have to give of your entire essence. And you have to make sure that you are actually helping the person. It's not enough that you contributed, but your question is, how can I truly lift up that person and bring him to a higher place? And that is the obligation of charity, and that is the obligation of yadai, to give all 10 levels of your soul to that individual. And furthermore, the Torah uses the terminology al roish. You shall place your hands upon the head. Upon the head can also allude to the idea that it's above and beyond the head. And that is, many times we say to ourselves, that person, he doesn't deserve my help. He's such an evil person, such a bad person. I don't want to help him. And therefore comes along the Torah and says, V'samach yodei al roish. You shall place your hands above his head, to go beyond what you think he deserves, to bring him back to his previous glory, to bring him back to his previous situation, and to give him back his dignity and his pride. The Baal Shem Tov tells us that a soul can come down to the world for 70, 80 years just to do another person a favor. And therefore, when an opportunity comes to our hands or to our hand, we have to ask ourselves, perhaps this is the entire purpose of my soul's descent to this world. And therefore, to use out every opportunity that we have to do a favor or a good deed for someone else. And to do this not only reluctantly, not because we're coerced, but rather to do this with all 10 attributes of the soul. To do this with joy and with confidence and with excitement, and to do it in a way with a smile, because you are fulfilling a mitzvah, you're doing God's holy deeds. They tell the story that Rabbi Yosef Weinberg, who is famed for the lessons in Tanya, he translated the Alter Rebbe's Tanya and giving lessons, commentary to it. And he was also a fundraiser. So once he receives a phone call late at night from Brazil. And the individual in Brazil asks him to do him a favor, to go to Lubavitcher Rebbe and ask for a bracha, for a blessing. It was already in the middle of the night. But that night the Rebbe had Yechidus in 770. The Rebbe would meet people all night long. He did this a few nights a week, depending what time of the year and which year it was exactly, but the Rebbe would meet people all night long. And so he figured he'll come back to 770, and he'll go to Rabbi Chodakov, the Rebbe's personal secretary, and give Rabbi Chodakov the letter from this person's request. And Rabbi Chodakov would give it into the Rebbe that night or that a.m. When he came to 770, he realized that the Rebbe already finished seeing the people, and the Rebbe's office was closed. However, after the Rebbe would greet people and talk to them, after the Yechidus, after the private audience, Rabbi Chodakov, the Rebbe's personal secretary, would again go into the Rebbe's room just to make sure that the Rebbe had everything that he needed before the Rebbe would leave the office. He was hoping to meet Rabbi Chodakov before he went back into the Rebbe's office to conclude the night. However, already Rabbi Chodakov went into the Rebbe's office. So he figured he would take the envelope and push it under the door. And that way Rabbi Chodakov would see it, pick it up, and give it to the Rebbe. However, a few seconds after, Rabbi Chodakov walks out of the room. He says, "No, did you give the Rebbe the envelope?" And he said, "What envelope?" Realizing that Rabbi Chodakov did not give the Rebbe the envelope, Rabbi Weinberg was beside himself, because he realized now that the Rebbe himself would see the envelope and bend down to pick it up. To cause the Rebbe, such a holy tzaddik, the Moses of our generation, to have to bend down and pick up the envelope is something which is not honorable and bakovidik. And so he felt very embarrassed. And so the following morning he wrote another letter to the Rebbe to apologize, and telling the Rebbe he's sorry for making the Rebbe bend down and pick up the envelope. And the Rebbe responded with the letter, and he said the following. He said, "There is no reason to apologize. The purpose of my entire being is to lift people up, in particular when others have overlooked them." So the Rebbe was saying that was my whole essence, and that's to pick up the envelope, to pick up people. And especially when my secretary and others have overlooked these people, then I really have to be there to lift them up. And this is the meaning of the Torah, v'samach yodai. The Torah says you shall place your hand. It really means you should lift up the person with your hand. And by doing so, God will lift you up and bring you to a better place, and a holier place, and a more charitable place, and a more beloved place, with the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days.